Everyone says that you can't game on a budget anymore. They say that GPU prices are through the roof, parts are too expensive, but is that really true? Well, today I'm proving them wrong because I've actually put together a build that is only $400, and no, it is not trash at all. You see, I'm always looking for the balance between price and performance, and I've got to say this build actually checks out all the boxes for that, and in my opinion looks amazing. So what exactly did I end up going for the build? So with the CPU, I went with the Ryzen 5 3600. Yes, I know you've heard about this CPU just about everywhere, and I know it can get annoying, but you simply cannot compete against it, especially considering it's AM4 and at a local price of $40. Next up, the GPU I went with was the GTX 1660 Super, also a phenomenal part, although I will have to admit this specific model runs a bit toasty because it is fairly small. However, the card was purchased at a phenomenal price of $50. The next highlight of the build is the motherboard. Now this is where it gets a bit interesting, because what if I told you that I purchased a brand new B450 motherboard for $42.21? Well, you might start thinking that it might be one of those weird Chinese branded motherboards from AliExpress or something crazy. Well, you are completely right, and in fact, this is a machinist B450 motherboard that is from AliExpress. However, don't knock it because it runs great as long as you don't slap an insane CPU like a 5800X3D on there.
No, la policía, no.
You'll be fine. In fact, the Yes Man himself gave a recommendation on his channel and stated that in most cases it would be fine up to a 5700X. Now finally we had to talk about the case because this is one of my favorite parts about the build. This case is an Okino Cypress 3 that I purchased a while back for $57.54, and while I wouldn't say this is the best value case out there, it looks really nice, and that might just be the deciding factor for you. Now the next components aren't necessarily that interesting, so I'll sum it up as quick as possible. For storage, I went with the Vancity 1TB SSD for $55. For RAM, I went with a kit of G.Skill 32GB for $50. For the power supply, I went to Seago Tab 650 watt power supply for $60. Formula Mod cables for $15. Thermalright CPU coolers for $19. A CMOS battery for the motherboard for $5. And finally, a Windows key for $10. With these parts in hand, the total ended up coming to $414. So I did in fact clickbait you guys by a little bit, but you could always make changes. Like for example, you could always go for the 512GB version of the SSD. You could go with 16GB of RAM for this computer as well. Cable extensions aren't absolutely necessary, so those are little tweaks that you can make and it'll drastically reduce the cost. But anyways, the whole entire build ended up taking me an hour and 30 minutes to finish. However, I will say there's a lot of time that goes into finding the parts and then picking them up and then testing them out, so keep that in mind. But with a little bit of patience, you could always get a build like this. And while I talked about how long the build take, I actually didn't show any footage of the actual building, and that is why I will be putting little snippets of the building process right here. So we're gonna start off with the CPU, and this should be pretty straightforward. Nothing too complicated, you know? It should just plop in. Sure that shit's locked in right there though. And then we only have 2 RAM slots. Pretty self-explanatory right here, right here. Just line it up. As you can see, the gap, this little gap right here in the RAM, it's a little bit towards the downside. So just make sure it lines up with this. Nice pop. Boom. And then last thing, might as well install the SSD while we're at it. So it's also pretty straightforward. Now, if I really were to cut costs in this build, I would honestly put a 500GB, but because this only has one M.2 slot, as you can see right here, I would feel bad for the person that is buying this and doesn't have the option to upgrade and is stuck with 500GB unless they put their SATA. So at that point I was like, nah, I'm not gonna do that. I would just put a terabyte instead. So I'm gonna do that. It's pretty straightforward as well. Just plops in right there, and then you just hold it down and there's a little screw that goes in right here. There you go. Now we're gonna actually test it out, see if it boots at all. And then with that, take this out, which is my monitor, my keyboard, and I'll just test it out really quick. But of course, we need to put this, which is the graphics card, because Ryzen 5 3600 has no integrated graphics. And then this is a CPU cooler. We're gonna install that really quick. Right here, I'm simply installing the mounting kit for the CPU cooler, and should be included regardless of what cooler you go for. So now we're just gonna put the fan. Now this one is actually originally for a liquid cooler. And that is the reason why this little cable right here is so short, because it was like, it was basically to make it really clean. But because of that, I don't have room to move it around unless you kind of take it out like that. And now I have a little bit more room to plug it into the CPU port right there. So that's what I've been doing with those AIO fans. Now we can actually get to testing. We're gonna put this on and then connect these power cables. Let's see what happens, shall we? So, all right, fans full spinning. The monitor turned on. Okay, fans are cooling down. Normally when you work on PCs and you boot it up for the first time, there usually is like cycles like this. However, I was getting a bit concerned because it did it like 3 times. But what the heck? Man, please don't be weird, bro. Okay. After some weird sessions with the motherboard, we got the boot little thing. So I'm gonna take that as a good signal. Move on to the next process, which is installing this onto the actual computers. So now we got it on the other platform right here, which is my other desk. But now let's just prepare everything. We're gonna put the IO shield. You gotta install this before you install the motherboard, otherwise you'll be in for a quick another 30 minutes taking out the motherboard, so just be careful. So I got this kind of fan hub right here. This is like a splitter. And then I'm only using it because these 3 fans are easy to connect, but I only have, it doesn't have the last extension for this last fan on the back of the PC, so I had to use this hub. Now we got the front fans, and let me go look at the diagram real quick. Now for the diagram, don't be scared. They are labeled on the cables that are coming from your case. So you basically just find the pin that is missing. As you can see, there's one that's labeled no connection. You kind of go off that and you kind of follow it as best as you can. Now let's put these cable extensions. Now we can actually install the graphics card. All right, so we got everything pretty much ready to go. Now we actually put the power supply on here. So you can see, just make sure the fan is in the bottom. Alrighty, so now we actually need to give it a shot. I know it looks like a mess right now, but don't you worry, we'll get that fixed real soon. Alright, it should turn on. There we go. Yep, We're looking good. So now we get to the annoying part of cable managing. I'm not gonna show you guys that. I'm gonna show you guys the finished product. So as you guys can see, the build ended up coming out pretty clean. But now that we have actually put the computer together, we can actually go in and actually test it out. So as far as the games that I tested, I went for some that are towards the lighter side for obvious reasons and on the popular side. So this ended up making me choose Counter-Strike 2, Fortnite, Marvel Rivals, and Warzone. So those are the 4 that I'm going to be testing, and we'll see how it performs. So this will be the diagram I'll be using. This one right here is CPU temperature, the wattage, GPU temperature, and the wattage as well, and the FPS. Now as far as settings, we're using performance mode, frame rate to unlimited. Might as well test it to its potential. 3D res 100%, and yeah, that's what we got. With these settings, I ended up averaging 170 frames per second, and I tried my best to put clips of more stressful areas. For example, here's me driving the car, here's me driving this weird machine from Star Wars, of course. I'm not trying to offend you guys, but I don't know what it's called. And of course, we ended up getting the dub because it was mostly robots. Another robot. Oh, it's a 1v1. Alright, here are the settings. I don't know much about CS2 if I'm being honest. I barely even played CS1, but I basically just made sure it was 1080p and let it choose whatever it wants. Seems like it put everything on high, so we'll see how that goes. With these high settings, I ended up getting an average of 131 frames per second. However, I wasn't able to put the overlay like in the other game, but CSGO gives you the option to put it on the top right, and that is exactly where I got it from. Holy smokes, my whole team is dead, boy. Peek me. Bro. Oh yeah, it's too easy. Alrighty, so now we're on Marvel Rivals. Honestly, just left the default. Seems like it put FSR 3, quality, borderless, everything on medium, so I'll see how that goes. So with Marvel Rivals, I actually got to go in and tweak the settings a bit. As you guys can see, I disabled the frame generation, I disabled some of the lighting on there, because this game was very hard for the computer to run, if I'm being honest. But then again, I use the stock settings, but for the most part this game ran pretty smoothly at 50 frames per second. Alright, so we're officially in Warzone. And let me show you guys the settings. So I pretty much let it put everything it wanted to. The only thing I changed is fidelity cast. I put that on 70, and then everything else is kind of normal and medium, with the exception of the static reflection, which is set to high. Yeah. And finally, with Warzone, the average seems to be somewhere between 50 and 60 frames per second. So that pretty much wraps up the video. However, I did want to give a few tips in case you're looking to get something like this locally and at the best price possible. I would recommend that you buy the GPU alone. And I would say it won't be as difficult as it seems. Like if you just look at it from eBay, it's $100, and you might think, oh, he's literally buying a GPU that's half off the asking price, but that's really not true because on eBay they have fees, they have the shipping fees, and all these things kind of add up towards the end. So locally, I would say it would be pretty easy to find a 1660 Super for like $60-$70. Careful while buying used GPUs, and always try to ask them if you could test it out on their setup. And if they're not comfortable with that, tell them it's cool, but you'd rather wait for somebody else that can, and try to find it. So who knows, maybe you'll get like a RTX 2060, because it's a pretty insane market. You never know what you can get as long as you keep throwing out those offers. Another thing I will say about this build is that I will be repacing it. After watching the clips while editing and all that, I saw it peaked like at 83 degrees. So I have already listed the computer for sale, but I'm gonna repaste it real quick, get those temperatures down hopefully by a lot. And yeah, other than that, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you're tuned in with my series, that should be coming out in about a week or two. So no, a week for sure. Anyways, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and good luck building.